The music's on, the disco ball has dropped. And actually, let's turn the lights back on and the music down, because tonight we're taking a deep dive into the way social media impacts our voyage upon the wagon train to the stars. This is episode 9 of DiscoTrek, a Star Trek Discovery After Party podcast on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. And this is our first supplemental episode that I've lovingly titled Star Trek versus Social Media. I'm going to talk about the content of this podcast and what to expect in just a moment, but first, let me introduce everyone else. With me, as always, is my co-host, Jeff Hewlett. Hi, Jeff. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, Heather. Doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing all right. And with this are two of our Star Trek Las Vegas friends. And Carl, you were on the show already, weren't you?
Yeah, I was back for episode 4. Or I guess it was episode 3 for this show, but it was episode 4. It's a little confusing.
I'm pretty sure. We've had so many guests on, but you're difficult to forget. So everybody, Carl Wonders is here. And our other friend is new to the show, but not new to our friendship. Welcome, Amy Imhoff. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thank you, Heather. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on. So before we dive into the meat of this discussion, I wanted to talk a little bit about the content of this episode and what it is and is not. First and foremost, as this is a Discovery-centric podcast, we will be discussing sensitive material regarding sexual harassment, assault, PTSD. These are all issues that have not only come up in the real world surrounding actors in the show, but have played a part in the plot of the first half season of Discovery. While we don't plan to spend an excessive amount of time discussing these topics, just please take note that they may come up. So if you're sensitive to those subjects, you may not want to listen to this episode. As for what this episode is and is not, I want to spend a little time talking about this because I feel it's important. Social media's presence in the land of Star Trek has been very divisive, but in reality, Star Trek's past is divisive enough without social media. Tonight, we're going to tackle the subject of how social media's influence impacts not only our experience as fans, but the experience of the creatives and cast who make Star Trek come to life. In a perfect world, this podcast would be a discussion among Discovery fans and non-fans, but I wasn't able to make that happen. However, I feel that tonight's panel is varied enough that we're able to provide some perspective from all sides, even if none of us truly dislike Discovery. That being said, our goal for this podcast isn't to convince anyone that they should or shouldn't like Star Trek Discovery, nor is it our intention to shame anyone who isn't a fan of the show. It is, however, meant to facilitate a discussion that explores and maybe even helps explain why there's such a division within the Star Trek fandom and what we can do to help change the tone of the conversations around Discovery and bridge the gap between us. So before we get started, I wanted to go around and kind of let everyone introduce themselves, tell their Star Trek story, and give their overall reaction in the first half season of Discovery. So Amy, why don't you lead us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, sounds good. So I got into Star Trek when I was 7 years old. My first episode that I ever saw was Yesterday's Enterprise from The Next Generation. So I had a really good introduction to the show. I really liked seeing the female characters on the show, and they really became a focal point for me, which is why Captain Janeway is my captain and my favorite character. I'm sure I will tell anyone who will listen, and everyone who is familiar with my work knows it to be true. But I've done a number of panels at Star Trek Las Vegas, Star Trek New Jersey, the Mission New York that happened last year for the 50th, and as well as other regional conventions such as Shore Leave in Maryland, talking about women in science fiction in general and also Star Trek in specifics. So when I heard that Discovery was going to have so many awesome lady characters, I was really looking forward to it. And so far, it has not let me down. I really do like, actually, my favorite character on the show, I think that is a woman, is Tilly. I really like her, and I do love Michael. Obviously, she's a very serious person and like very intense in a way that I was not expecting her to be, and I like that about her. But Tilly is the most easily likable and easily identifiable for me because I often sometimes you say I'm very outgoing and bubbly and enthusiastic, and also I have strong opinions, and sometimes I might occasionally offend somebody with what I have to say or what I jump in with, and I've accepted that about myself, and I think Tilly has accepted a lot of things about her personality, just like everybody needs to, right?
Yeah.
So I enjoy her, and I really loved Philippa Georgiou, and I was sad to see that we lost her so early on, but I think it was good to kind of set the tone with that kind of a captain, and she seemed like a very encouraging captain, especially of Michael and her career path.
Yeah, I think there might be a petition out there to get a Georgiou spinoff.
I'd watch it. I'd totally watch it. And I just like seeing so many I like to just see so many different new faces, male and female, and robot and alien on the bridge. I've followed Doug Jones for a long time. His career in Hollywood's been really interesting. I really liked of course I enjoyed Battlestar Galactica quite a bit, and I was glad to see Rekha Sharma had a brief but memorable turn on the Discovery. I also like the Admiral. I'm glad that she's still with us.
Yeah,
whether or not she's going to make life difficult for Lorca is another question.
Or whether Lorca is going to make life difficult for her somehow.
Yeah, I'm sure he's capable. And I love Anthony Rapp. I saw him, and when Rent had their revival, it was about 12 years ago now. I saw him when they came back to New York, and he was incredible. And also, he's in one of my favorite X-Files episodes. And I think when I heard that he was going to be the first openly gay character in Star Trek, I thought, this is the perfect choice for casting. So I'm very happy to have him as part of the cast as well.
Yeah.
That's my feelings on Discovery so far and where I'm coming from. And it's not all roses and rainbows. There's definitely some things that I think that was an interesting choice, or I might not have liked a couple of the character choices that they've made so far, or plot choices. But overall, I think they're doing very good work on a franchise, and they're doing right by it.
Awesome. I agree. So, Carl, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, kind of like Amy is, I started watching Star Trek when I was about 7 or 8, and I always like to tell people my initial exposure to Star Trek, because it's not something you would really expect for somebody that then fell in love with Star Trek in general, because the first thing I ever saw was Star Trek 3 as the film. And then the 2 episodes of TOS that I followed that up with were Spock's Brain and the Empath, which are not exactly held in a lot of high regard among fans, although I actually have a real soft spot for Spock's Brain in a way. But that really quickly turned into a full-blown fandom when Star Trek The Next Generation debuted, when we all sat down to watch Encounter at Farpoint, and I was hooked from the opening credits, really. So and that's really carried me through most of my life. I did have a bit of a break from Star Trek, not because of Star Trek, but because I just was in graduate school and I didn't have the time that was needed to sit down. Although at the time it was fine, because you could, pick up a show here and there at random, and you probably weren't going to be missing a lot of the plot. This was mostly for Voyager, really. I still watched Deep Space Nine all the way through. And, now with Discovery, the idea of having this serialized storytelling, since that's really where TV has gone. And, Deep Space Nine really played along a lot with that towards the end of its run, especially. But this was really supposed to be the first time we had a full serial storytelling. And, first I want to say that basically everything Amy said about the characters, I completely agree with. I think it's a really interesting cast of characters. I think they're all very well realized by the actors involved. It's great to see the diversity that we have in Trek finally. It's great to see, I think I'm very much a Team Stamets viewer. I think Stamets is amazing. My fingers are crossed that whatever's going on with him at the end of the last episode is going to get cleared up.
I was so worried. My husband's like, "You look so upset," and I was like, "But what if something happens to him?"
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and then there's some heavy looking stuff that goes on in the preview for the next round of episodes too. So if anything happens to him or Culber, I'm going to have a problem.
So did you catch the La Boheme reference for Rent?
That made me so happy.
that I was so excited. I was so excited.
No, I was like, well played, Star Trek. That was fantastic. And like you said, there are some niggling things about the show that have been bugging me. Heather, we talked a little bit about I'm not convinced, honestly, that it really is a serial story. A lot of it feels like they had plot points they figured out. They said we have to get from A to B to C to D, and they do that. But then these episodes also seem to be very self-contained in that they sometimes do have that reset button feel to them, where you have at the end of Lethe, you have a situation set up, and then you follow that. And I apologize if I'm mixing up my episodes. I have to go back and do a rewatch, but you follow that up with the time loop episode, if I'm not mistaken, and you have Lorca there, and he's just doing his own thing, being captain, and no reference back to all the stressful stuff he went through in the previous episode, or you had that wonderful chilling moment with Stamets in the mirror, and that's just been left by the wayside. Yeah. And I know I've had conversations with people about their annoyance at the whole previously on Star Trek Discovery recaps where they it's not just what happened last week. It's remember that plot point in 4 episodes ago that we've completely ignored? Well, we're gonna bring that back in now, kind of thing. And it doesn't seem to me like it's a story that if you were to write a novel, I don't know if the plot would progress the way it's doing. But all in all, I'm happy with each individual episode more than I am with the entire arc of the season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
The episode with Sarek, that seemed like a step out, and then it came back to where they were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they really wanted to establish her relationship with Sarek in a different, more concrete way than they had previously. And but they also had to he was gonna go meet the Klingons, so maybe we'll send someone else instead. Oh, that's what that was really about.
Yeah, it was. We have to get rid of the Admiral somehow. So.
Oh, the Admiral's causing problems for me. She's gonna take away my command. How convenient! A Klingon meeting.
That was really a great episode because of the development for Michael Burnham's character and just the background, and then looping that whole story into the entirety of Star Trek canon.
That was cool.
Yeah.
I love the way they're playing with the 50-year history of Star Trek of she was bypassed by Sarek. I'm sorry.
So because Spock, he wanted his full.
Spock said, "I'm not going to go."
Yeah.
So yeah.
But she's not his biological child. I think that was a big.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I'm adopted, and to have the main character of Discovery be adopted, I didn't realize it right away because you're like, oh, she's the ward of Sarek. I thought, oh, okay, cool. But then it really dawned on me, she's adopted, and this is this adopted person navigating this family, and to have him choose Spock as the one he wanted to go, to the in her instead of her. I was like, oh, that's very. That's very emotional.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought of it that way. That's a great perspective to bring.
My brother is not adopted. My parents didn't think they could have kids, and I'm not comparing it to that. There's nothing like that in my past. But they were very even tempered with both of us in terms of opportunity and everything like that. It wasn't this not a personal issue, but just to understand it from the perspective of someone who's adopted, I was like, that is harsh. Yeah, that is a harsh thing for her to deal with. Especially because you're not allowed to have emotions, but deal with this horrible thing.
Nope, just suppress it, compartmentalize it, forget actually dealing with them.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, do you want to tell us a little bit about your Star Trek story?
Sure. Yeah, I was born in the 70s, so I was born a little too late for the original series when it officially aired, but I was fortunate enough to have an uncle who was very much into Star Trek, and I got sat down to watch it a lot when I was very, very young. And I mean, the first episode I saw was The Devil in the Dark, and that's been my favorite episode pretty much ever since. And I've talked about that a lot on the Tricorder Transmission, so I'm not going to belabor that too much. But I was also a very lucky Star Trek fan because my uncle took me to see every single Trek movie when they opened. So I've seen every single movie in the theater on opening day, and I've seen every series through all the way through Discovery now as they aired on TV. So I've been with Trek ever since I was a very, very little kid, and I've also been podcasting about Star Trek for 4.5 years and over like 240 some odd episodes now. So I've been talking about Trek for a long time. So, and all of our DiscoTrek listeners, I guess, have been listening to my opinions on Discovery so far. So I don't need to rehash everything about Discovery so far. But quick recap: I was on the fence the first 3 episodes. I had a little bit of a rocky start with Discovery, but episode 4 really turned me around, and ever since then I've been getting more and more into it. And I think on the last DiscoTrek last week, or actually earlier this week, I was gushing about how great the mid-season finale was. So I'm fully on board and can't wait for January to roll around. And
Did the time episode shift the time loop episode? Was that what shifted it?
no, it wasn't the time loop episode. It was what was episode number 4?
Choose your
butcher's
pain?
knife. The butcher's
is
knife.
that-
It was
Yeah.
the butcher's knife. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was the
Oh,
butcher's
okay.
knife. That was the one that turned me around, and I've been getting more and more into it. I think Lethe was a strong one for me. I just Frane's Sarek is just brilliant. That episode was brilliant. You guys have already talked about it quite a bit here, and I reiterate whatever every comment everybody said. It was spectacular. I actually liked the episode on the Pavin planet. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I love the on location shooting, and that was just a nice break from being in the ships all the time. Everything has been great since episode 4 for me. It's just been building and building. I've loved I've loved how a lot of the characters have developed. I wish that we had more time to get to know more of them. I guess that would probably be my one biggest nitpick for Discovery is I just don't feel like we have a crew that's gelled like other Trek shows have. I don't feel like we're as cohesive a whole from a crew perspective. But it's still early in the show. It's only the first half of the first season, so there's plenty of time for the crew to really come together and gel and become more of a unit like we're used to seeing. But I'll leave it there. But yeah, huge Trek fan for a long time, and very much into Discovery.
I tend to forget that this is only 9 episodes and only a half season.
I know, right? It
Yeah.
feels longer.
A lot has happened. A lot
Yeah.
has really.
Yeah.
It's
through.
been intense and involved, and it feels like we've gotten a lot more out of these 9 episodes than in the first, 13 episodes of other seasons. In some respects, in others not. But so I get a little self-conscious telling my story, and I think that kind of plays into the division that we're going to talk about because. Although I was interested in sci-fi as a child throughout my life, I never was drawn to Star Trek. I watched some TNG and I think some Voyager when that came out, and I think that the general public's perception of at least the public I was around said Star Trek is for nerds. And I think that really discolored my perception of what I was watching because given there are some bad episodes of Star Trek out there, I can't say that every episode.
I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I didn't really get into it until I was an adult, and my ex-husband was a Star Trek fan and grew up watching it with his family and his mom's especially. So we started watching Enterprise when that came about, and despite the fact that we were on the internet at that time, there's still social media wasn't what it is now back then. Hopefully that made sense. I wasn't getting on a podcast and hopping on Facebook and Twitter and tweeting about it right after every episode. So I watched it, and I will be honest, Enterprise probably wasn't the best first show for a woman. Uh, and I lost interest, I think, somewhere in the third season of it. So Nemesis was my first film in the theater, first Star Trek movie. So despite everyone hating it, I have a soft spot in my heart for Nemesis and for Tom Hardy now that he's all grown up.
I do not hate Nemesis. You are not alone. You are not alone.
I'm glad, because I know it gets a lot of slack out there. But I moved out to Colorado in 2008, and then in 2009 went to Starfest here in Denver, which is not specifically Star Trek, but had more Star Trek guests than not. And then I went to Star Trek Las Vegas for the first time in 2009. And since then, like, my life has changed completely. The ex-husband is an ex, of course. And I have found a true family among the people at STLV, and then within our unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas Facebook group, which we mention here all the time. And I just fell in love with Star Trek, embraced it completely. And now I do several podcasts about it and spend the majority of my time talking about it. But I have a hard time telling that story, because really my fandom kind of bloomed, in 2009, like when the first Kelvin timeline film came out. And it's upsetting that there's such a division there with people who either like those movies or who strongly dislike those movies. And I sometimes am embarrassed to tell that story, because I don't want people to think, think poorly of me because my fandom kind of took hold during that time, if that makes sense. So I think that for the most part, people have realized that the Kelvin timeline brought a lot of fans and, a lot of new blood to the franchise, and is probably a big reason as to why we have Discovery on television today. So I wanted to jump. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, about damn time Star Trek returned to TV.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I think, those of us here, like, we're happy to have Star Trek on TV. And I'm not saying that, everyone should just be quiet and accept that this is the Star Trek you get, and so be happy that Star Trek is on TV, because that's not a fair thing to say. But it's been interesting because, like I said, right now we live in this age of social media where we're all people behind a keyboard. And all of us, we get together at a convention once a year, usually, or other conventions, and get to talk to each other in person. And in-person communication is usually a lot more productive than online communication. But this is really the first time that we are experiencing new Star Trek in a way that we can instantly connect with our friends. And as we know, Discovery has been received very well by many and not very well by many others. And while I think right now it seems really prevalent, like this division just is kind of in our face, it's really been there like since TNG was announced. I think everyone's probably seen that newspaper clipping that people are showing with all the little snippets about TNG and how it's a different ship. It's not Captain Kirk. Like, this isn't
Captain is bald. Who is this British man with the big nose?
Yeah.
Why is there a Klingon on the bridge? Why does he look like that?
I lived through that. I remember, and I remember distinctly being anti-TNG when it aired, because I was so
How
into.
old were you when it started? I just need like a sense of your growth mindset.
Well, I was young at the time, and I was used to Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and the movie, so I was very into that. And it was a change. It was a change. It was jarring. It was new, and it was different. And it took me, I think, almost all of the first season before I really settled into it and embraced it for what it was. And I enjoyed it after that. But, I remember, and this was way before anything social media wise, before even the internet or email, any of that stuff. And all we had were our friends and family, maybe, and I guess if you were old enough, coworkers. But all you had were the people that were around you to talk to. So, I remember maybe 25% of the people that I knew, including me, were in that camp, and the other ones were more. But there was never any. It wasn't like the vitriol you see today. It was more just like, I'm just not into this. It's not my Star Trek. There wasn't. It wasn't people spewing hatred about it. It wasn't. I didn't walk up to somebody in the hallway in high school or in school and start talking about the Next Generation, and people start completely ripping the show apart and cursing and swearing and saying you're stupid for liking it or whatever. It just wasn't that way. It was much more civil.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I don't know, Jeff, if you ever got your hands on these things, but I had a friend who was she's my mom's age. They worked together in the library, and she was a big Star Trek fan, and she actually subscribed to these fanzines that people used to sit in their basement or their living room or whatever and type up these handmade magazines and staple them together and mail them around. And it was the first kind of fan community. And, she would get them, and then she would give them to my mom, and my mom would give them to me, and I'd read through them. And a lot of it was these, letters that people would write to the fanzine. And I distinctly remember a letter from somebody that was basically listing all the characters that had come out on the, for Next Generation. And it was really early on. So it was still Julian Picard was the name of the captain originally.
Oh, wow.
And it was, and I don't remember all the comments, but it was basically Julian Picard. And it was like, come on, really? Like, this guy's going to be in his 50s and he's going to be the captain. And I'm paraphrasing, but I distinctly remember the sentence, and he's not even an American.
Oh,
It was one of the word was the sentence that was in there. And then the next one was Will Riker. And it's like, make him the captain. He's the Kirk kind of guy. And I think it was still when it was like Masha Hernandez was still the character instead of Tasha Yar, and Leslie Crusher was the kid and not Wesley. But, and he just went through, and
that's
then
awesome.
But it was, I mean, it's a neat time capsule. I wish I still had them, but they got lost in one of my many moves. But, these things, these complaints are still out there. But I think one big difference now is that, even then it was, here's the person's name and here's their address and here's what they wrote.
Right,
and there's a tangible tie to an actual person that exists in the real world, and their words, for lack of a better term, have consequences. And now it's basically like I could be, Joe Blow 72 on Twitter, and I could say all the junk I want at anybody I want to, and none of it will come back to me, the actual person.
Yeah, no accountability anymore.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
no reputation building, because you can instantly erase whatever reputation you have by changing your name, deleting your account, making a new one.
Right.
Plus, it takes a lot of effort to find some paper and a stamp and an envelope and write to the person who had that opinion and tell them that they are wrong and they are going straight to hell.
It is amazing, I think, how much or how having to put in some kind of buy-in, even if it's, a 19-cent stamp or whatever they cost back in the day, to do something like that. But whereas it's like, oh, just turn on my laptop and type a few characters and, go back to whatever I'm doing.
You could even just put like 4 emoji in and get your point across.
Right. Yeah.
And plus, don't forget that there was still a gatekeeper on those. Someone had to choose to publish that. The letter could get in, and the person who's putting together the fanzine say, I'm not publishing this. So there was still a level of, for lack of a better word, editing or, filtering on those. So I guarantee you couldn't write a letter full of expletives to one of those fanzines and expect to have it published.
Oh, no.
Whereas today it's completely autonomous. You can put whatever you want, wherever you want. And I mean, you may wind up getting filtered somehow, but you can still get out there.
Yeah. And even if it does, your audience is limited to however many people get this magazine, which couldn't have been that many because it's all these, homegrown publications. They wouldn't be able to handle, several thousand subscribers, so it's not like now where, millions of eyes are on this thing and then it gets you couldn't retweet a fanzine letter, anything like that. So it's just the scale is so different now.
I think what you were saying about watching Star Trek with other people, I watch Star Trek in a complete vacuum. It was literally me because I was young. I played with the action figures with my brother and my cousins, and that was about it. Like I just didn't have anyone to say this is nerdy to me and this is not, or this is something that's not for girls, or like stuff that came to me when I was in middle school. I moved in the middle of 7th grade, which is possibly the worst thing you could ever do. And I got I found another person who was new that year, and she was a little nerd like me, and we both loved Star Trek, and I finally had someone to talk about it with. And the other kids like heard us or something, and then they made our lives miserable from that point forward. And but I'd already loved it, and Janeway was already the coolest, and I was like, no, I can't stop watching, even though it makes me so unpopular.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't.
I got made fun of for watching Star Trek too when I was in school. It was a quote unquote nerd thing to do.
Nerds,
and
right? Now that's like nerds are cool. Nerds have inherited the earth.
Yeah, man. I wish, because I now as a fan, like I missed out because I could have watched TNG when it aired, and I didn't get to, and that just makes me. I mean, I could have watched everything as they aired, and I feel like I missed out on a lot, even if I wouldn't have had a lot of other fans to talk to. Just being able to look back at that time, like I don't have that now. So I think that's another reason why I'm just so grateful. I mean, yeah, I got to watch Enterprise, but Enterprise just
I won't. No.
Yeah, it's I should have watched Voyager. Like, if you're gonna have a woman sit down and watch Star Trek for the first time, at least anything but Enterprise. I've rewatched it since, right? So I like the female characters. I don't like the disrespect towards the female characters and the misogyny that's prevalent in Enterprise, but that's a whole other podcast.
That is a whole other podcast.
Listen to Women at Warp where they talk about it. But yeah, it's really sad that that's there. That's outside of fandom, that's other people. So I'm glad that, now it is the time of the geek. The geeks have inherited the earth. And so at least there's that, but we still have this really, really sharp division where it's like, it's black or white. And the reality is that a lot of people know they're right in the middle. And for some reason, those voices get overlooked. So I think it's important to make sure that those voices are heard too, and to, as we've always said here on DiscoTrek, to facilitate, constructive conversations that can be critical of Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek as a whole, and just to show that there's definitely, it goes both ways, right? You can.
Yeah, and it's funny when we do a panel about women in Trek, because people will say, "Oh, you're just criticizing the show," and it's like, no, like there's a difference between, having literary critical theory, right? Just because the critical theory surrounding Shakespeare applied by Shakespeare scholars doesn't mean that they hate Shakespeare. They love Shakespeare. That's why they're breaking it apart. They're breaking it down and saying these are the good things and these are the things that maybe are a product of the time. Like, we weren't allowed to put the word feminist in the program for Star Trek Las Vegas for our women in Star Trek. We weren't even allowed to be called women in Star Trek.
Yeah.
We were Trek girls until the 50th anniversary.
Oh God, I forgot about that.
Because they didn't want to drive men away from the panel, which I understand, but I think now, a lot of the fandom, I'd be saying a lot, I'm not saying everybody, has evolved to a more broad understanding that feminist just means equal. You just want the men and women's representation to be equal, and you want women to, not take their clothes off on screen all the time. So, and you're allowed to say like, oh, the 60s were an era of miniskirts and go-go boots, but women in the 60s saw miniskirts as a symbol of power.
They did.
Like there's a lot of context for a lot of these choices that were made that we were not privy to because we weren't there.
Yeah, it's just like it's either all the way. I hate to use like the left and right because I don't mean it politically. Like it's extreme black or extreme white. It's
extreme to this. It's not in the center at all, right?
Right. And
Not
it's
not you're
like
not walking the middle road. You're walking along.
either way that you go, you wind up to a point of frankly of ignorance, because you're either hating something entirely or loving something so entirely that you're unable to criticize it or see anything wrong with it at all. And I mean that is okay for people who truly don't like a thing and can't find anything that they like. At least you have to try, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
if you try and you can't find something that you like, or you try and I mean, I can't criticize someone for loving something too much as long as they're not completely ignorant, and saying that this is perfect and it can't be improved. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I see your point. You just it's like that with, I mean, Voyager comes under so much fire. I was actually in Orlando for Star Wars celebration this year because my husband had been such a good sport about going to all my Star Trek events for the 50th that I wanted to. His favorite is Star Wars, so we went down there and we were chilling at the hotel pool after the con, and there were some guys there that had some like nerdy tattoos. We were talking to them, and then the one guy was like, "Oh man, I love Voyager. Janeway's the best." And Jay goes, "Oh my god, you just
Nice.
made her like entire year," because he was a young guy and he was straight and he liked it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He liked the vibe. He said Janeway's a badass. Like B'Elanna's a
Oh
badass.
yeah.
I
Mhm.
love the show. And I was like, oh, thank God. somebody,
Some of my
somebody,
fondest memories of watching Voyager, by the way, I'll just throw that out there. Back when it was actually airing, I had a really good buddy of mine who had a really cool apartment, and we used to go there and watch Voyager, and just so many great memories of watching that show. Was one of my favorite time periods in Star Trek.
I mean, all of Star Trek, like there's good Star Trek and there's bad
Of
Star
course.
Trek. Like, and that's the reality. And
and
it
we'd
gets
all rather watch the bad Star Trek than a whole host of other things.
seriously. So it's like
Absolutely.
I don't see why we have to hate Discovery so much. But again, here's my question, and I'm trying to understand with this division, like, why is it that like we feel like our opinions or our wishes or what we want of Star Trek is like what the creatives should listen to. All that, like, what I think about is the fact that I think a lot of fans, and I felt this way, feel a sense of ownership with Star Trek because, look, Star Trek original series was canceled, and the fans essentially helped bring it back. I won't say that the fans are solely responsible for bringing it back, but
They're pretty close.
they're pretty close. There was some assistance there, but yes, but I mean, they played an extremely important part in getting Star Trek back on TV, and I think that Star Trek fans even now going to see the Kelvin universe or Kelvin timeline films, putting that money into it and encouraging other people to do it is helping to keep Star Trek alive. I don't know. Do you guys feel that way at all? That like this sense of ownership plays a role? It's almost like sometimes fans feel that the writers that they should be catering to us, I guess.
Well, I think,
Carl?
yeah, I mean,
Who's us though? That's what I would say. Like, which
yeah.
us do you? If you start worrying about which us we're going to cater to, you're just going to drive. They're just going to drive themselves crazy as writers.
Yeah. Well,
They'll either never write anything or it'll be like a 20-hour episode. I mean, I think it's interesting, and I do think that Star Trek is somewhat unique in that you had the fan movements to bring the show back from the dead, so to speak, originally. But I don't think this ownership or this need to influence the creatives is anything new. I mean, you have the stories of after Plato's Stepchildren goes out, you have these people saying, "I can't believe you had Kirk and Uhura kiss. I'm done. How dare you?" You have stories that Nicholas Meyer tells of Star Trek 2, and they're like, "If Spock dies, you die" letters coming to him, kind of
Oh
stuff.
shit! I have
Yeah.
heard that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, again, I think it's really an accessibility thing. Again, just like with everything else in social media, you have Anthony Rapp, you have the writers' room with their own Twitter handle, and people forget that this is a person on the other side of a computer screen, and you're not, I mean, maybe they will, I hope not, but you're not going to go up to, a writer on the show at a convention and say, you need to do this. I can't believe you went this way with the story. You really ought to do this, but again, because they're separated by, computer screens and anonymity in some cases, they feel like I should have the right to barrage you with stuff because you put yourself in their mind. I think they're saying, you've made yourself available to me, so I'm going to take advantage of that. And what I really worry about in a way is that they're just going to say, well, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. And we're not going to get the great, amazing access that we get. And, things like, I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm tooting Heather and Jeff's horn here when, after our episode of DiscoTrek goes out and we raised a point about how it was a shame that Rika Sharma's character was killed off so quickly. And Anthony Rapp actually wrote back and explained, well, this is what happened and this is why that happened. And the fact that he listens to the show is amazing to me.
Yeah, I know. They take the time to be engaging. And I think, we as in a collective fan base should not abuse that privilege.
Absolutely.
Because it is a privilege that they decide to open themselves up to talking to the fans. And he even accepts the criticism. Like, I was surprised to hear him reasonably engage.
Yeah.
I thought if somebody said something negative, he would be like, oh, well, that's their opinion. I'm not going to fight with them on Twitter.
Yeah.
But he actually respectfully engages, and he's not the only one. You saw so many of the former Trek people are very active on Twitter as well. Mm-hmm. So they get their opinions out there too.
I think I find also that fans seem to have a lot of trouble accepting that Star Trek is not just a TV show and their passion, that it's a business. Mm-hmm. And it's there. Yes, it's there as entertainment, but they also want to make money having it on television. It's not just, again, it's not just there for us. I mean, in some respect, I really enjoy with Discovery that when you watch the show, you can see that they are providing some level of fan service, as I'll call it, including little Easter eggs in all of the episodes, little references here and there, or a character's name. And for the most part, it hasn't been done to the point of coming off as pandering. Mm-hmm. I think, there might be one thing here or there that was a little much for some of us, but overall, you can tell that the writers and even the actors, that they appreciate fandom, and so they do kind of give back in that way. But on the other hand, they're the ones responsible for Star Trek. It's their job, and Star Trek is, what's the word? Not a commodity, but it's a way for all of these people to make money and make a living, right?
I have a comment about the whole "it's a business" thing.
Yeah.
I went to the premiere of the Spock documentary with Adam Nimoy in Tribeca at the Tribeca Film Fest last year. And was it only last year? Wow. And feels like a while ago. But Zachary Quinto was there. And I kind of wanted, they said, do you have any questions? And I was one of the people who raised my hand because I like to ask questions at these things. And I said, what do you think the cultural shift was when it came from nerds are nerds and we're going to beat you up and throw your comic book on the ground to nerds are cool and there's a million Comic Cons and now Star Trek, now it's cool to be a nerd and now it's cool to talk about Leonard Nimoy and talk about him as being an icon. Whereas before, people wouldn't really admit that they liked some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And Zachary, the answer that I was not going for was what Zachary Quinto said, which is studios basically realized that they could make money off of you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like that. And I was annoyed that's, I felt like he ended the conversation that I wanted to hear from, especially to hear from Adam and to hear, people who kind of had grown up in the franchise.
Yeah.
And seen the shift, because Zachary Quinto came on the scene when he was, I'm young too, obviously, early 30s. And, he's somebody who came on the scene and benefited from something like Heroes, which was about people with superpowers, like right away. And I was like, maybe he said he wasn't a Star Trek fan growing up, and I was like, you didn't feel the pain of being a nerd, and then seeing the shift now and being able to do stuff within the franchise and being able to engage with this thing that I love, on like a on a panels and at conventions and on podcasts and things like that. And for me, that shift has been really profound. And I think by taking it and making it about a bottom line, that did bother me because I feel like Star Trek is not just a bottom line for so many people. It's a set of emotions and a set of like belonging and inspiration.
It's that ownership. I mean, it's not so much like, well, Star Trek is mine, literally, that you own it, but we invest so much in it emotionally and financially and with our time, that and it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing to be able to find a sense of family or belonging within this community. And so it's hard when you would you really love a thing, and then especially if you get something that you don't like, and
you keep saying, what brought me in was the 2009 the JJ verse and all that, and I'm like, I hate that movie.
Yeah, and I think
I'm not gonna beat you up for liking it.
And I think that when the JJ verse came into being, that was kind of when everything kind of burst, like the bubble burst, and this vitriol started happening, this war between fans, because, and part of it is that, okay, it's Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and so a lot of people have difficulty having those characters redone, and then having it redone in a way that is really
I always just wondered why that was the choice. Like that's literally my main issue, is that I want to see that. I think they just took names that people knew so that they could recognize it.
Yeah, absolutely. I
think dropped it into a different kind of space story, a more Star Wars-y.
Yeah, absolutely what it was, so that it would attract a lot of people, and it did. And I like the 2009 film.
I didn't hate the most recent one, which is high praise for me that I did not hate it.
It's pretty. I think most of the people I know, most of the fans I know, liked that one, and I liked it. I didn't love it. I don't love any of those films, to be honest. But the 2009 film has a special place in my heart because I watched it and then said, I'm going to go to
you. It was cool and new, and that's the important part.
Yeah, and it was that way to a lot of people. So, but it's like, I think that's when this really started, because that was the first iteration of Star Trek that we had in this time of social media. And some people hated it and some people liked it. And then there was everyone else in the middle that was like, well, I like this, but I didn't like that. And then, that ushered in the way for Discovery. And so for the most part, I think a lot of people were very excited for Discovery, and then also very apprehensive about Discovery. And unfortunately, the course of Discovery here kind of continued to really drive that rift.
I don't know why people were that apprehensive. I understand. The only thing I was apprehensive about was when I heard that it was going to be set before the original Enterprise. Because they keep doing that in my opinion. Like go past the Voyager. Like I want to go past the Voyager timeline.
Yeah, and a lot of people do, and I think it's just, again, because of what they kind of, with everything that happened with the Kelvin timeline and what people are unhappy about there, they were afraid that they were going to do the same thing with Discovery. And in some sense, they have done that, right? Mm-hmm. They have.
There's been some retconning. It's true.
Yeah. Well, and it looks like a movie, and it looks a lot.
But I like that because we have the tech now. Just do it if you have the tech.
I love it, and it kind of looks like the dark side of the JJ. It's like instead of everything being all white and like it's all dark blue and everything. So it looks different. the Klingons look much more like the JJ Klingons than any Klingons we've seen before. So there was a lot of resistance as this news was coming out, and then they put it behind a paywall. And
Yeah,
that,
it was kind of a shooting self in the foot maneuver a little bit.
we've really tried hard in our STLV community and in our podcast to I mean, in no way are we championing CBS's decision to put it behind us, okay? And again, we do not own Star Trek, and we are not going to convince them to pull it off of CBS All Access unless everyone didn't watch it and it didn't get the numbers it needed, which didn't happen. So,
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm going to pay for it because I believe in paying artists for their work, and that's basically what Discovery hinges on. Because it hinged on that, I paid for it. It wasn't like I love the idea of paying for it, but hey.
Yeah. Well, but to be completely fair, every Star Trek series that's aired since the advent of paid cable has been behind a paywall. You just didn't realize you were necessarily paying for
right.
it.
Well,
But it's the reality
Your
of
parents
it.
were paying
Right,
for
your
it.
parents are paying
well,
for
sure. I think
ahead,
also,
Carl.
I mean, the thing about if you want to split hairs, I think for a lot of people, myself included, I wasn't subscribing to CBS All Access,
Right.
and I had to subscribe to CBS All Access to get this one show because I perused CBS All Access, and other than maybe After Trek, I'm not that interested in what else they have. I mean, that said, you look at the show and the quality and the money that they're clearly spending on this show. The money's got to come from somewhere, and flip on network CBS and look at those shows. Like the money's not there.
No, it's not.
You're going to get the. I mean, you need a Netflix or a Hulu or an Amazon or somebody to get behind it. And
look how like cheap it is to make The Big Bang Theory.
well, sure.
Oh yeah.
They have what like a couple sets and a bunch of cameras, and they're in the
Aside
studio.
from
It's
aside
the
from what
cast
they
that
pay
costs
the
money.
cast,
Yeah, the cast costs money.
Yeah, well, now they do because they're the most watched show on TV. But to get the most watched show on TV, they didn't have to put all that much capital behind it.
Sure.
If The Big
I
Bang
mean, and that
Theory
show's
had
been on
faded
forever.
out,
So,
if it had faded out, they wouldn't have been like, oh, this is a huge loss. But if Discovery had, it would have been like, we spent millions on these special effects.
Yeah, at this point, it's like we've gone through the CBS All Access conversation over and over and over, and now we've been through 9 episodes, and I don't necessarily want to rehash the conversation, but I will be very honest, and that is that yes, the majority of my friends that are tried and true Star Trek fans, and that's not an acclamation of anything other than they will do what they have to do to watch Star Trek. Okay,
Yes.
they're paying for it. They're happy with the quality of what they're seeing. They may not like the plot, the storyline, the characters, whatever, but most people seem pleased with the quality of the show for their money. However, I think we can all agree, hopefully, that CBS All Access has some work to do.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yep.
They basically launched. It's like when UPN launched with Voyager. It's CBS All Access launched for real with Discovery.
Yeah, but and on a streaming platform that's continuing to have some issues, and hopefully they get worked out. But then aside from that, I'll be honest, like I'm not going to cancel during the winter break because I'm going to go binge watch Discovery 2 or 3 times. But when Discovery is over in March or something, I'll probably cancel my subscription unless there's another Star Trek show, or should they remove the Star Trek content from Netflix and put it only onto All Access. But if they do that, they have to put the HD versions because
Shush, don't give them ideas.
well, I want to see Star Trek survive, and so I'm not opposed to helping support Star Trek, but I do also have Netflix, and I think that of course, if they had put it on Netflix, they probably have more viewers because more people have Netflix.
Yeah, Netflix is like now a cultural phenomenon. Like it's past what it was originally meant to do, and it's just gone beyond.
I think most people who have cut the cable have Netflix, whereas nobody really had CBS All Access. And so I think there's some work to be done there. Having said all that, just like we've said, I pay the $10 a month for the no commercials And I will continue to pay $10 a month as long as Star Trek is on there, because the quality of this show is just the best Star Trek. The way that it looks, okay, not the plot and everything else, but just the visual effects are the best thing I've ever seen out of Star Trek.
I think we finally caught up to the vision, I think, that Gene had in terms of the tech that's available.
Yeah, so since you mentioned those two magical words, and I don't want to spend too long on it because we've got some time restrictions and I want to move the conversation along, but it's one of the things that comes up a lot, and it kind of ties into the idea of ownership, is this thing that is Gene Roddenberry's vision. and that in and of itself. So this is where sometimes I have to speak up on social media, and we'll talk about the specifics of how we deal with social media and commenting and stuff in a moment, because for the most part, I tend to not engage. But when someone is giving out false information, I cannot just sit there quietly. And so somebody, tweeted the other day that, Gene Roddenberry would never have wanted to make money off of Star Trek. That was not his vision.
No, that is why he started.
False.
he existed in TV to make money.
Yes,
false.
yes.
Yep.
So I will give everyone that part of Gene Roddenberry's vision was what we see in Star Trek, and this optimistic version of humanity and where we're going to go and everything that's there. A world without famine, a world without poverty, a world without war, a world of evolved intellectuals on pretty spaceships. What is it, Hilton in space, they say, for TNG.
Yep.
Yeah.
But this was also, as Star Trek is, this was Roddenberry's job, along with all the people who became involved in Star Trek. And so not only did he want to make money, he came up with products like the IDIC to put into Star Trek to sell, to make money. Like he along with others created merchandise specifically to push and make money off for Star Trek. So it's just false to believe that Gene Roddenberry's vision did not include making money. That doesn't mean that it didn't also include this beautiful thing that is Star Trek. But
I like to see it, just hearing you talk. It's like the Zeph from Cochrane. Like, you know what I see? Money, dollar signs. I want to retire on an island with naked women. That sounds like Gene.
It does sound like Gene, actually.
and
all of it does.
People really love to put Gene Roddenberry on a pedestal, and as much as I admire him for the human being, let me take that back. As much as I admire him for the vision of humanity that he saw, and for this overall message of peace and personal evolution, Gene loved money. He loved women. He was an alcoholic. Yep. He was not a great human being, and
he had flaws. Like
all of us do, and just like all of the main characters in Discovery do, which of course is a big reason why I love Discovery, because those characters are all human, and not literally, but they're all imperfect. We all are. Gene Roddenberry was. And so it's something that I will very passionately defend, in a sense, is that, his vision wasn't puppy dogs. Oh, replicated puppies. It wasn't puppies and flowers and everything wonderful. It included Star Trek being a business and profiting. And aside from that, like, I say on social media, and I may have said in some of our podcasts now, like, Gene's vision has really evolved, and it's not Gene Roddenberry's vision so much anymore as it is Star Trek's vision, because Gene Roddenberry is dead. And I hate to be so frank and blunt about this, but it really bothers me when people try to speak for Roddenberry's vision, because as much as you may think you understand it, unless you are Gene Roddenberry, you don't. And unless you are the people that have contributed, and I mean, this includes Gene Kuhn, even somebody like Richard Arnold. I mean, everybody had insights that have added to the evolution of Star Trek, so that these days I can't buy into throwing out Roddenberry's vision as any kind of argument, if that makes sense.
I think also when you think about, I mean, Gene sold the rights to Star Trek because he was broke, right? The Roddenberry family is not profiting off of all the merchant, like all the action figures, all them, like, you know, yes, I'm sure they've gotten something over the years, but CBS, Paramount, they're the ones who are profiting.
Yep.
You know, like I doubt any of the money from the Kelvin universe, like all the merchandise that's come out surrounding that, has gone to, you know, like Rod and his family, Rod being Gene Roddenberry Jr.
Yeah, it's not like Rod's just sitting there in his house on the hills raking in all this money.
No, and I think it's something people, you know, maybe they don't know that. Maybe they don't know that, you know, Star Trek, he had to sell the rights for, you know, because of money. Like,
Yeah. Well, and I
you know,
mean,
and
even though Rod
if he
is
felt comfortable, maybe he didn't like doing it, but if he felt like he had to do it, then, you know, who are we to speak to his vision of no, he didn't want money? That's the silliest.
Yeah, and I mean, Gene's vision itself changed over time. And quite frankly, if you want to learn about, I mean, and any Star Trek fan, if you're going to attempt to speak for Gene Roddenberry's vision, please educate yourself and go read any book that you can find, especially something like is it Mark Cushman?
Oh yeah,
These are the voyages.
These
Yeah.
are the
Oh, that's
voyages.
spectacular.
Really good.
Those are really great Star Trek encyclopedias. There's a lot of books out there, and that it's not an insult. It's just please, like there is so much to learn about the behind the scenes.
Gene's not the only like keeper of the kingdom either. I mean, you have people like the
Rick Berman.
Okudas
And Rick Berman
and Larry Nemecek and like all these, you know, people who helped who helped Michael Westmore, you know, who did the makeup, who helped who made the look of the show iconic, you know. Gene had an idea, but he had so much help executing.
Yeah, it's not just Gene's vision. It never was. You know, maybe while Gene was sitting there thinking up the idea for Star Trek, it was his vision. And when he played, you know, when he had the upper hand and he was making the calls, but still it's been influenced by so many people, countless people over the last 51 years. And that is the reality. And it's something that people truly need to accept. Because quite honestly, if you bring me that excuse, I'm not gonna be quiet, and I'm not gonna let you get away with it. I wanted to move into talking a little bit more in depth about how we interact on social media. And aside from this sense of ownership, I feel like the other aspect that's really playing into our behavior is that of mob mentality or herd mentality, group mentality. You can call it a few different things. And that's basically that we as human beings like to be around people who think like us. It's a pretty basic thing. We gravitate towards people who think like us, who have common interests. You know, that's why we like other Star Trek fans, because we share that passion.
That's why we get together every August in Vegas and spend lots of money at the Rio.
Yeah. So in the past, you know, this was a really great thing because we would, you know, have our meetups like STOV, or back in the day, they had, you know, your Star Trek fan groups, which we have some here where
There's
they
a very active chapter in New York as well.
Yeah, there's lots of different groups where people go and get together and they're able to talk face to face and have conversations about what they like, what they don't like. And very rarely do I ever find out about any physical fights or racism or, you know, just any of the things that we see on social media. I think that right now, like, there's a lot of division in our country because of our political environment. And I don't want to we don't talk politics here. I just want to point out that because of that, I think that overall general environment in our daily lives and society is bleeding into our online experiences and how we deal with each other. And so this thing happens where, like in the case of Anthony Rapp, whom you mentioned earlier. So first of all, we have the fact that Anthony Rapp is portraying alongside Wilson Cruz, one of the first male gay character in Star Trek. Together, he and Wilson Cruz's character, they're a couple. We don't know that they're married or anything, but now at episode 9, we've gotten a beautiful moment between them where they kiss and they both say, I love you. And it's done in a really wonderful, natural way.
I was so happy. I cheered.
That was the highlight of that episode for me. As everyone knows, if you listen to the last episode of DiscoTrek, I had a very difficult time with another part of that episode. So the relationship between Stamets and Culber and what happened specifically in that episode was just redeeming for me, for the part that affected me so severely. Their relationship overall, their storyline, and their characters, I just have completely fallen in love with myself. And as a queer person, it means something, right? But from the minute that like Anthony got brought into the fandom, and I focus on Anthony because Wilson Cruz didn't really join until a bit later, but from the moment that Anthony was brought in, and from the moment it was made clear that he was going to be the first gay character, like on social media, you can't look, and this kind of goes for everything where there's division. Like, you can't read the comments, you can't look at Twitter mentions, because there's a very severe vocal. There's just the reality that there's a lot of homophobia in the world. Okay. I don't think there's as much homophobia as there are people supportive of the queer community, but Anthony, because
it's so hard.
It's extremely hard. And Anthony is extremely, interactive on social media, on Twitter, even on Facebook. So we start watching these comments come in, and it's not just, I feel really terrible for an actor whom I really admire, but I think people don't realize that making one comment doesn't just affect the person you're directing the comment at, but it also affects everyone else, like everyone, not just in the queer community. It doesn't just hurt me, but it pains allies to see that. And so what happens?
I mean, my brother is gay.
Right.
Every time you can't, and it's like when it's your sibling, and he's a younger sibling, and I'm the oldest. It's like this blind rage just takes over.
Right. And so what happens is that we get this divisiveness where you have an army of, what did I call this the mushroom army, or the shroom army, that rise up to defend Anthony against all of the people that are just making homophobic comments, and it doesn't belong in Star Trek, except, and that's a whole other, and it's just something, again, that's kind of been rehashed all over the place. Like, Star Trek has been about diversity from day one, and at this point, I think that people who aren't down with the diversity in Star Trek, but who still like Star Trek, are just, they don't care. Like, they don't see it. They don't see how that's been a part of it. Or it's just that, well, they don't care. They don't mind if there's a black woman on the bridge. That's really great, but I don't want gays in Star Trek. And
I don't want to see a gay man kissing someone on a starship, I guess, is the problem.
And I hope that if that was the case, they also didn't want to see, torture and sexual assault. But I've heard less about those things than I have heard about gay characters. And it got worse when Anthony came out and made the public statement that Kevin Spacey had assaulted him when he was a young
14.
14, and Spacey was in his 20s or something. And the disturbing thing was that not only, and again, so here I am when Anthony is attacked for being gay. And look, guys, I know a lot of people don't quite get it, because from the outside, look, I'm in a heterosexual relationship, but I like all kinds of people. I've been with all kinds of people. So just because I'm in a relationship that doesn't look gay doesn't mean that I'm not a queer person. So that affects me.
I think that's an excellent point that, a lot of people might not understand.
Yeah.
I've mentioned it to my brother when, we have a very good friend of ours who said, like recently as last year, just, I still don't believe in gay marriage. And I'm like, how can you say that to my face? He knows my brother. They've hung out a lot, but he doesn't believe that my brother should be able to get married. And I said this to my brother, and I was upset about it. And he didn't get upset. He said, if he had to change the way he thought about it, he would have to change his entire way of thinking about life.
Yeah.
Some people are just not capable.
Some people are not. And in that case, like I don't have any advice or solution. Like that's just, except for don't
make yourself crazy.
Spend your time, like put your, the end of this is this discussion is basically going to be about put your energy where it makes a difference. And look, in some cases you can have a conversation with people and enlighten them or help provide them a different perspective or a realization that, just because I'm in a relationship that looks this way doesn't mean I'm not the person that I am. But look, back to the point about Anthony Rapp. So I'm a sexual assault survivor. I've been sexually assaulted numerous times in my life as a child, as a teenager, in one case over a number of years. I talked about that last week if you want to. Well, anyway, so being a sexual assault survivor, my heart breaks to know that this happened to Anthony, and I have no doubt that it did. But now I get to see all of the really disgusting and disturbing comments made about him and why he waited 30 years and blah, blah, blah. And you know what? I waited that long too. It takes a long time to come to terms with what happens to you because it's really terrible. And you have to live that life to truly understand it. And that's something that I've realized this past week. But
I can't hug you right now because you're in Denver and I'm in Connecticut, but I'm hugging you from my room in Connecticut.
Thank you. I will say this. I am able to talk about what happened to me because other people talk about what happened to them. And I continue to talk about what happened to me because I know that it helps other people. And that's what Anthony Rapp was doing. It's not easy.
And he opened a flood. I tweeted him. I said, this was necessary. Your bravery was necessary.
It was. And a lot of people, there's just, again, this mob mentality of either I'm going to defend this person or I am going to tell this person they're wrong or it didn't happen, etc. And I mean, it even came out of some people in the Star Trek community, including, well, obviously just fans in general, but other actors. I think Manu Intrayami, I can't say his name.
Intrayami?
Yes. He said some pretty disgusting comments on Twitter, which I have no desire to reiterate here on this show. But, basically was Team Spacey and saying a lot of terrible things about Anthony Rapp. And so I hope never to see him again at a convention. I'll put that right there. But there's just a reality that people seem to swing one way or the other. And look, when there is free speech, and I think we all appreciate our right to have free speech, but I don't appreciate hate speech.
There's a big difference between hate speech and free speech. And no, I've been having this class as a professor, just new this semester to being a professor. You have 17-year-olds, and we discussed what had happened in Charlotte, and we discussed, the way it bleeds into our discussions almost weekly because this is the climate we live in.
Yep.
And even when you're talking, my husband's an attorney, and there's definitely a difference between free speech and hate speech, and it's been established for a long time in the court system. And for people who want to give the impression that the guys who run Twitter, they don't ban hate speech because they see it all as just speech.
Well, it comes, okay, I'll refrain from the political comment I was going to make. I mean, we have Nazis right now spewing their Nazi hate on Twitter. And, this is the thing that I like to point out because as everybody knows here, Jeff and I admin our Facebook group for the convention. And a lot of times when we try to enforce our rules that are basically don't be a hateful person, people
Don't
cry out.
be an a-hole.
Yeah, people cry out free speech. However, our group has rules, and if you want to be a part of our group, you have to adhere to those rules, just like Twitter has terms of service. And if you want to be on Twitter, you should adhere to Twitter's terms of service. So I know that not everyone goes and reads the terms of service, but if in there, Twitter condemns using their platform as a tool for hate speech, then nobody spewing that stuff should be on Twitter. Like those accounts should be closed. And it's kind of scary that we live in a time right now where that's not happening, especially when we're seeing more and more people jump on the bandwagon, and feel like it is now okay to do this. And it's not just happening to Anthony Rapp. It's happening to a lot of our TNG actors, like Marina Sirtis, are pretty vocal, and Marina's very vocal politically.
Marina's very vocal across the board, and she's happy about that.
Yeah, she talks a lot about soccer, right?
She talks trash about the opposing team.
Yeah, she's very vocal, and a lot of people, so she's a very liberal person, and so I will see her tweets get quoted. I'll search for Star Trek or something on Twitter, and she'll be quoted, and it'll be some mean comment. And I think in that case, at least, it wasn't actually like a quote. It was just like they took a screenshot or something. So at least she's not notified.
That's good.
But it's difficult to see all of this happening because the actors are, copied or put in mentions and all this. So they're seeing all of this. And I think so after Into the Forest I Go, when we had the kiss between Stamets and Culber, like I said, that episode was a lot for me to process. And I sat down and I was like, look, here's the one thing that I just have to hold on to and appreciate right now. And so I did screenshots and I made a tweet and I just said, thank you, because diversity matters, or not diversity, but representation matters.
Representation matters.
And that tweet kind of took off. And I woke up the next morning with a lot of Twitter mentions and a lot of homophobic comments. And those, I had copied Anthony Rapp and Wilson Cruz, and I think Writer's Room, and maybe Erica Lapolte and Bo Young Kim, who were the writers, just because I wanted to include them in my thanks. And that's something that I don't do a lot. I don't like to tag these people for no reason. Like, I'm not going to be like, here's a pic of my dog and tag a bunch of people,
But Blizzy is so cute.
And I'm sure that they might like Blizzy and his tardigrade. But so anyway, that tweet, this is what I have to hold on to. At the end of the day, that tweet was retweeted almost 300 times. It has over 1,200 likes, and I got less than 50. And 50 is a lot, but I got it, and it may have been less than 25. Frankly, I didn't count, and I started muting and blocking people. But as many, like, for every one homophobic comment I got 10 likes or retweets or comments that were supportive. And so I really try to hold on to the fact that, this went beyond my circle. This went beyond my little curated Twitter feed. So this, to me, was reflective of the public, even though a small portion, but those people were still supportive of having gay characters in Star Trek and having that kiss. And that's what I have to take from it.
I think a big part of it too, Heather, and just coming from, being a big part of feminist Twitter and being a big part of, the conversation surrounding women in science fiction and gay characters, especially LGBT characters in science fiction, in this instance, is that, you're expressing an opinion as a queer woman, right? And that's going to make you a target, whether you like it or not. And it's still making targets out of people, in every walk of life. Right. So I think that by the fact that you doing that, it shows the fact that you felt you felt, largely comfortable, and you got so many retweets and likes. To 1,200 likes is nothing to sneeze at for sure. Especially with a tight knit community so everyone's like, oh, Star Trek, there's so many fans, but the people who are active in the community, it's not that big. It's like, it's a small world after all, that kind of thing. And I think if you got, a couple outliers like that, you blocked and muted, I'd have to say, like, on the whole, then I could like feel proud of the fandom too if I were you.
Yeah.
Yes, but you just making the choice to not look at the garbage.
Right. But before we move on and I respond to that, Jeff and Carl, do you guys have anything to add? Because I know that Amy and I are talking a lot.
You guys have been very quiet. I think I'm thinking that.
Oh, well, I mean, I can't argue with anything you're saying here. And, it again comes down to this idea of, as far as free speech goes, I'll defend your ability to block whomever you want from this group, and whether they enforce it or not. Twitter's right to have terms of service. I mean, yeah, you shout First Amendment, whatever. Yeah, you have the right to say whatever you want, but you don't have the right to have a platform to do it from. And if you want to shout this stuff, go to the top of your roof and get a bullhorn and yell if you really want to. But no one says that you're guaranteed an audience for this stuff. And to me, that's the real, negative side, I guess, to the existence of social media these days, is that, you can have a conversation and anyone can just butt in with their own opinion about things, just by hitting reply. If you're at a convention.
Have you had a specific? I'm just curious if you've had a specific experience that you wanted to share with us, where you were dealt with that instance.
I haven't. I try not to stir the pot or even get involved in a lot of these things. I mean, the biggest one I have, and I don't remember this person's name and I wouldn't bring it up, and Heather, you'll know who I'm talking about, is this person who made a point of saying how she's a quote unquote true fan of Star Trek, and on listing all the issues she's had with Discovery and how she's received death threats because of it, and counts all the mentions she gets and all this stuff. And, at the end of the day, and I would just kind of politely try to engage, because like Heather, I try to correct the record if there's something completely factually wrong that's being stated. But, and then some people jump in, and honestly, the most butting in and almost borderline abusive behavior I've encountered on social media came from a former job of mine, where I was tweeting from a congressional hearing on electronic cigarette regulations, of all things. And the vaping community is a very vocal group of people, and I got put on lovely lists of, like, on Twitter, you can put on lists at random or by people, and it was like, the dumb ones and these amusingly named lists, and stuff that I don't do that anymore. So, luckily and Amy, you mentioned this, and I think you're right. I'm just a guy on Twitter, and I think that in a sad way kind of shields me from a lot of criticism that, you and Heather may get because of, your identity. Just, and it's a sad thing, but I think it's true that just, they're not going to be willing to engage me when they would rather go after other people.
Well, it's good that you were able to like recognize that and to articulate that too.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly aware of it, and I'm
just saying it's like, it's good for like other listeners to hear you articulating it in that fashion. Like, I'm like, I don't know you at all. I met you like virtually like an hour ago, right. And it's very it's very heartening and very it's a positive step for me to hear that from a guy I don't know in the fandom. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's something I always try to keep in the back of my head, and I mentioned this, in context of the last Shore Leave episode that was put out, where it's like around the issue of online harassment. It's like, write something and then think, like, how could this be interpreted? Like, even if you don't mean it in a bad way, like, think, could this possibly be interpreted in a negative way? And if you say yes, then change what you're saying. I mean, it's not what you mean. There's no intent. Your intention is not communicated. It's the words, and it's incumbent on the person sending something to consider how it's going to be received by somebody who doesn't get tone, which is a big thing. There's no tone on reading text, so the reader is going to infer however they want to infer from it. So, don't assume just because you said it in your head, oh, this is a witty thing that I'm saying because I'm hearing me say it out loud in my head. That might not be how it's read.
Yeah, words are powerful, whether they're written or spoken, and it's just when we're speaking, like when we're doing podcasts, sometimes I say things that I don't say them the right way, or I lose my words, or it just doesn't come across the way that I want, and so I try to be just very cognizant of what I'm saying. And then Jeff knows if I go back and I'm like, oh gosh, did we not approach this the right way? Can we go add something or edit this so that it doesn't sound as bad as I think it sounds? That kind of stuff happens. But just yesterday, I was trying to listen to a podcast that a friend of mine does that is very critical of Discovery. I had actually stopped listening to it because it just got overly negative and spent too much time focusing on negativity, in my opinion. And that's just for me. That's not to say anything else about it. But I went back yesterday just to revisit and see if anything had changed, or honestly, I really wanted to listen to something that was coming from the opposite side and from the opposite perspective that I have. And they were discussing Michael Burnham, and this person said, I quote, "I wanted her to get a bullet to the head."
Oh, goody.
And this is somewhat, I mean, I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to say what the podcast was or who the person was, and I hope that they can respect the fact that I'm not doing that, if they do listen. But I know the person that said that. I don't know them extremely well, but they're not the type of person that I would ever expect to have said that. And of course, I don't think that it's like a literal. I mean, obviously she's a fictional character, right? So, but that's it. Like, that's a very strong thing to say.
Yeah,
Even
maybe if they had time to reflect rather than just spit it out in the moment, they would maybe not say it or at least rethink it. I would hope.
I just wouldn't say those things specifically, and that is me, and that is my opinion. But I typically don't really wish any character dead. I didn't care for Commander Landry, but I sure as heck didn't say I hope she died. That's a very difficult thing for me to have heard and then try to reconcile with the person that I know, and then not have some very negative feelings about that person because of hearing that. And I think that frankly, I think a lot of people don't care. Like, they don't care about whether or not they should have a filter. They don't believe in having a filter. They believe they should say what they want to say. And I, in some ways, understand that. I think that with doing that, you have to take certain responsibility for the way that your words are received.
Mm-hmm.
And again, some people don't want to take that responsibility. They do not care if they offend you, and that is just who some people are. And so, kind of to bring this discussion towards the end and on what to do. And we've kind of talked about how we handle this division on social media. And look, my goal is, I don't want there to be these two sides. Like, my hope is that somehow Star Trek fans can come together, and I don't know when that's going to happen, because Discovery is still causing a divide, and a large part of that is that paywall. Another part of it is just Klingons or something.
You aren't wrong.
I mean, and that unfortunately, like, and there are a lot of people I know that love Star Trek that had no idea that Star Trek was coming back on TV or was on TV, and B, that just won't pay for it. And so those people are not going to see it, are not going to support it. I can't talk to them about what's going on. And these are people who genuinely love Star Trek. Okay. It's not people who are just putting their foot down and don't want to pay. And again, that is someone's right. And I understand where those people are coming from. But I hope that at some point we're able to really come together. And to be honest, like I think the reality is that when we do come together in person, this vitriol isn't there. Carl, you weren't. Well, I guess Carl and Amy, you didn't go to STLV this past year.
No, I could
No.
not go this year.
And I missed you so much.
I know I missed you too, but you were so nice. Heather Skyped me into the ladies panel that Jara and Women at Warp did. It was so nice.
That was fun. But so, Discovery had a presence there, and it was really great. Number one, that they did have a presence, because Jeff and I were sitting here saying, oh, we don't expect anything. And they surprised us. And so I think the overall tone was very positive around Discovery. Mary Chifo, Kenneth Mitchell, Wilson Cruz, Sam Bartholomeos, we had Glenn Hetrick, we had Neville Page, who were makeup, we had Ted Carter Hall, we had Kirsten Beyer, we had Akiva Goldsman. All of these people working on Discovery were present, and they were on the...
Didn't Brian Fuller also kind of like, that was before he had... Or no, that was last year.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't there.
He wasn't there? I know he had like a presence.
I don't remember.
At a different event. Sorry.
I think it had to have been a different thing. But
yeah,
so all of these people... all of these people were there. They were present on the floor. They were there through most of the convention. And as far as I saw, the tone was pretty positive. Jeff, did you kind of get that same vibe?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I don't remember hearing anything remotely negative at STLV this year at all.
Right. So, when we come together and we're there in person, like as we said at the start of this podcast, you're so less likely to have this level of confrontation and vitriol and hate that happens on social media. And so
people are not brave enough to do it to your face.
No.
That's just what it boils down to.
They're not. And I think at the end of the day, they're just not even those people. I mean, I'll be honest, there are times myself where I am so frustrated with the negative side. And, as I've said, look, I have plenty of my own criticism of Discovery. I've talked about it in the last 8 episodes we've done of DiscoTrek. There are things I don't like and things that I can criticize, but I'm over what the Klingons look like. Like I'm over focusing on things that just are not going to change at this point, because that's pointless. And I get extremely frustrated. And there are times when I want to lash out, like I want to let that anger out. And I think that, when that there's anger present. Okay. I think there's a lot
I think it's on both sides, and just acknowledging that is a good step.
Yeah, I think that being aware that frustration is and anger is there on the side of people who don't like Discovery and on the side of people who do like Discovery. And when we play into our anger, it's not a productive thing. Like,
I think there's a very important factor in social media that I think gets missed in a lot of these types of conversations. I've discussed this same type of thing with so many different people, and there's a psychological aspect that's built into every piece of social media, every platform that's out there. If you've never heard this term before, look it up, because it's very fascinating. It's called gamification. There is a psychological aspect that's programmed into all of this stuff that makes it self-propagating. No matter what you put out there, be it negative, be it positive, there are tools built in, likes, hearts, retweets, follows, hearts, likes on Facebook, hearts on Instagram, upvotes on Reddit, whatever it is. Whatever content you put out there, it finds an audience and people will affirm it for you. So it's self-propagating. Even if you do offend people, if you put negative things out there, you're still getting that psychological payoff of somebody liking it, somebody retweeting it, and you get these magic internet points. And that plays into there's a psychological hook there, and it reinforces that behavior, and people just keep doing it and doing it. And there's this whole subconscious part of it that I think is almost toxic in a way. It can be good, of course, because it can also reinforce positive behavior. But I think this is one of those things that really helps to maintain the some of the negativity that's out there, because those people do get that payoff.
That plays into the herd mentality where one person's doing it and then everyone else gets on the wagon with them, and so it's more, feeding into that more and more. And I can tell you myself that and this is a humble brag, I guess I'll say. I was really happy to see that tweet about Stamets and Kohlberg get so many retweets and so many likes, and I felt really great about that, because that was affirming to me that people felt the same way and that people supported how I felt and supported what happened in Star Trek.
And the people who post the negative stuff get the same payoff when they see the same thing for their tweets and retweets.
They do. And it's just interesting to me, because I know that at the end of the day, I'm a positive person. And I suffer from depression. So I have very dark times. But overall, I try very, very hard to be a positive and optimistic person.
I think there's also a part of it where you just have to, it's like, I think it goes even like all the way back to, remember on American Idol, it was like vote for the worst, and they wanted people to vote for who was the worst singer. No, I'm serious.
It's like that episode of the Orville the other day.
Yeah, I've read about it, and I've studied the pop. It's like when we go through this like, they call it like hate culture, right? So like you hate watch something, or you like you hate watch the Kardashians because you don't like them, or you. Or it's like this. Remember when Anne Hathaway was up for an Oscar and everybody suddenly was like, "Oh, who does she think she is? We're sick of Anne Hathaway," because before she was like America's sweetheart. And it's like, where does this there's like a breaking point where the culture just turns against people if they've been in the limelight for too long, right?
Well, and I'm trying to understand the psychology of this hate watching and being on the opposite end and putting all this energy into something that's very negative, and
makes me want to take a nap. I have other stuff to do.
It's exhausting, and I'm definitely mentally and emotionally exhausted, just in our general world climate, national climate, and in social media. And that's a large reason why I have backed out. And so now, as much as I do what I can to expose myself to opposing perspectives, because that's very important. It's you can't just see the world through one lens. You really have to try to understand it from every perspective. But as much as I do that, I also have to practice self-care and not respond.
Look at the haterade.
Yeah, well, Jeff and I talked about this in our shore leave episode, which was social media harassment in fan spaces. And that's a conversation that's pertinent really to how just we as people and Star Trek fans interact on social media. So it's a broader discussion of some of the things we're having here. And that's on shore leave if anyone wants to listen. But I have just started to disengage. And like I said, unless it's a matter of inaccuracy or false truth, not to be confused with false news, which isn't a thing.
Fake news.
Yeah. So unless it's something like that, I just ignore. Because I would rather at the end of the day put my energy into places where it's going to be effective, and have a positive outcome. And that doesn't always mean that it's a positive conversation. I had a very long Twitter conversation, or Twitter and public Twitter feed stuff, about how I was feeling about the sexual assault scene, the rape scene in the last episode of Discovery. And I was really trying to come to terms with how I'm viewing it, how other people were viewing it, and how even though other people understood that it was rape, it wasn't what I experienced when that happened to me. And it never will be. And at the end of the day, I just came to realize that, I don't think I want you guys to see, I don't want that to be on TV. I've seen it in other shows, and to really understand the severity of what that is, probably don't really want to see in Star Trek. But again, I had a conversation with a lot of different people, and at the end of the day, one of my friends said, thank you for this, and that it's I've learned a lot. Like, this Twitter has benefited me today when typically it really doesn't. And so I think that I know that I want my social media experience to be a productive thing. And so that's what I do, is not engage in the stuff where my energy isn't going to be effective or well spent. So Jeff, what do you do? Like, what's your advice here?
Well, I don't know if my advice is going to be the best advice. I've really started to talk more one-on-one with friends or in group chats, or in person about Star Trek and Discovery. I didn't find a lot of my social media interaction to be as productive, or inside our Facebook group. I'm more apt to be in more private spaces at this point. Not necessarily because I like to be in a bubble, but I just find that there's people that I know in my life, or people that I message directly, or people in these groups that are intelligent people who can speak objectively and constructively when we have criticisms, and have an actual real good dialogue. Not that there wouldn't be those people possibly on Twitter out there, and but I've kind of gotten a little gun shy of the drama and a lot of the hate that's going on out there. So I do actively try to avoid it a bit. So may not be the best advice for everybody, but it works for me.
I think it's valid advice, honestly, if that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to do what is best for you, and there's no right way, there's no wrong way. So Carl, what about you? I mean, you kind of talked about it, but
Yeah, I mean, I like Jeff, I try to have conversations at least with people who I know what kind of response I'm going to get back, at least the tone. And I try to stay away from the controversial topics. Like the most controversial thing I think I've said lately is, oh, this episode is probably the worst Q episode they ever did, and I had a little bit of an argument on it, but it's nothing that's going to, no one's going to send any hate mail my way because I didn't like hide and Q that much, and I try to just ignore anytime I see vitriol thrown around, because I don't even read it, just because, if I can avoid it, just because I don't want to get worked up. The other thing I've found myself doing in a lot of ways, and this extends into non-Trek related controversial topics, is I'll therapy write a tweet and then delete it. So instead of sending it out, I'll type out what my response would be, kind of look at it for a little while, and then I'll just delete it and not ever send it, because I'm like, well, okay, I was able to get my words out on virtual paper, so to speak, and I did it in a way that's not going to, cause any blowback to me, and it's not, and at the end of the day, is it really going to contribute to a real conversation? Probably not. So, but at the same time, I feel like at least I said my piece in my own head so that I can move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, any final advice?
I am more apt to engage. I think that's just my personality. Not in the Star Trek fandom lately. I have been very fortunate, I think, that I've been able to get a lot of positive feedback surrounding my opinions on Discovery, surrounding my opinions on the franchise in general. And I have to, I like our Facebook group. I think you and Jeff do a great job moderating it and kind of keeping the hate speech out of there. So I don't find it to be a place of stress, which is nice.
Yeah,
because other Facebook groups that I've been in have been a place of stress.
Yeah.
So I think that, to the point where you're like, I'm going to mute your notifications and I'm only going to go there when I have time to go there, when I'm in the right headspace to go there, that kind of thing. I think just, the engagement on Twitter is a tricky slope for everybody. And my advice is really like, kind of what I just said to Jeff, which is you do you, you have to take you have to, what you can handle, just take that on, and what you can't handle, you have to step away from.
Well, the nice thing is that while Carl and Jeff may be more quiet on social media, they are balanced by the voices of Amy and Heather. So there's some balance there. It's up until the last few years, really, I didn't talk about my life and all of these things that have happened, and some part I owe it to Star Trek for helping shape me as a human being, even in the short amount of time I've been watching it compared to others.
You in the club, Heather. Don't worry about your status, okay?
Yeah, I don't. I think anybody who knows me and talks to me realizes that my extent of knowledge and fandom, and frankly, I don't care what anyone has to say about me, because I'm pretty confident in who I am. But Star Trek has given me a great family with amazing, supportive people from all around the world, a diverse group of people, probably the most diverse group of people I've been exposed to, aside from when I lived in South Florida.
But it also sounds like it helped you find your voice.
It really has, and part of that has been with podcasting, and literally using my voice when I'm at STOV and when I'm with my Star Trek family or even local friends. That is the one place in this world that I can be 100% me. And I've heard that from other people as well. I don't fear judgment. I don't fear dirty looks, and I won't say that every Star Trek fan is accepting, because they're not, and that's a reality I think we all have to accept. We want to believe that we are all these evolved beings that we see.
Oh man, you just channeled my X-Files-ness with what I want to believe.
Yeah,
you triggered my X-Files. No,
man, I do. I want to believe, but that's not the case. We're all human beings. But the Star Trek community is the one place where I can truly be myself, and that has been extremely empowering. And so, because of everyone's support, all of my friends who listen, and Jeff, who does the podcast with me, and then all of our guests that come on, help empower me. And then when I find the courage to talk about some of the bad things that have happened to me, I get support from our listeners who send me messages, or just when I talk about this stuff on Twitter. And I'll be honest, I don't talk about this on Facebook. Facebook is a different animal for me. I own a business. I have clients who are friends, and I have people who I went to high school with who know the teacher that abused me, and who are still friends with that teacher. And so none of those people listen to this podcast, and that's why I feel safe talking about that here, and why I talk about it on Twitter. But at the end of the day, the Star Trek community has been an extremely positive place for me, and has had an immensely positive effect on my life, and I think everyone's life here, from what I gather.
Yes.
So I would like to believe that despite the current climate of social media, that's not really reflective of the Star Trek community as a whole, or that it's not entirely the truth, because when we do come together, regardless of who likes or doesn't like Discovery, we all seem to get along.
And we all gonna have a drink at the Masquerade Bar in August. That's the most important part.
We'll be there. We will have a toast to the first season of Discovery, and perhaps by August we will have a release date for season 2, or know when that's coming. Although I mean, they said 2019, which is a very long wait, and I hope it's sooner than that.
Judging by the special effects, probably not.
Well,
they gotta make it good.
I guess we will see. So I think we have reached our time. Carl, did you have any last words for our listeners or about the subject?
Oh, just think before you post, and realize that just because you're not looking at somebody face to face, that you're communicating with another person, and consider how your messages are going to be received by the other side, and not just be concerned with what you're throwing out there, because I think a lot of these miscommunications happen because you're not thinking about what it's going to sound like to the other person on the other end. And just don't be jerks. I mean, come on, don't be a jerk. And just because you don't like something, don't assume that everyone else has to agree with you. That's the biggest thing. Like, I'll respect you not liking something that I like if you respect the fact that I do like it. And just be respectful of other people. And that's all there really needs to be said. But unfortunately, it's not the only thing that needs to be said at this point.
Yeah. Amy, what about you? Any final words?
I think just echoing what was just said, but also, don't let your need to be right in your own mind trample on somebody else's feelings.
Yeah.
People say, like, don't be a bully. It's like, goes in the same sense of, like, if this wouldn't be acceptable in in a social setting, in a bar, would this get you smacked in a bar? Don't do it.
Oh, man.
Like, it's just a matter of having that self awareness, right? And which is basically what you just said. So
yeah. All right, Jeff, what about you?
Well, I echo everybody else's comments. Be good to each other, be respectful of other fans, because we're all Star Trek fans, and we can disagree. And unfortunately, I think we live in a time where a lot of people regard their opinions as facts, and opinions are literally just opinions. And they mean something to the person who has them, but don't necessarily mean something to the people that are of a different opinion. So your opinions are what they are, and respect other people's opinions. And, I think everybody will get along a lot better.
And that's what Star Trek teaches us, right? I mean,
yes, all the warm fuzzies.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're all human beings on this planet, and everybody deserves respect. Everybody deserves basic human rights. Respect is one of those basic human rights, I guess. And Star Trek people are, in my opinion, some of the best people in the world. So it's important that we take care of one another and just
live up to that reputation.
be like Leonard Nimoy is what I like to say.
Yes, be like Leonard.
Be like
what
Leonard.
What would Leonard do? WWLD.
What would do? Yeah, it's I like to put my energy where it matters and where I'm going to get something in return, even if it's just the good feeling of being kind to someone else. So I hope that this podcast has helped facilitate a needed discussion and maybe given some perspective to people. My goal was just to help everyone understand that we're all on common ground. Even if you don't like one Star Trek series, there are many other series that you may like. And at the end of the day, we can all just talk about Star Trek. It doesn't have to be about one episode of Star Trek, one series of Star Trek. But we all have this great thing in common that brings us together, and that is something to be celebrated. So I want to thank you, Carl, Amy, and Jeff, for your time tonight. And I definitely want to let people know how to find you on social media should they want to talk about Discovery or all of Star Trek. So, Carl, where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter at Carl Wonders. I'm also a part of the unofficial Las Vegas group on Facebook, so you can find me there if you're a part of that.
Awesome. And Amy, how about you?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Lightstar1013. I also have a blog that I am trying to keep up to date called Shoes and Starships. I've been a little delinquent in the last 6 months, but I did break my kneecap, so gotta forgive me. And you can also find me in the Star Trek group, Amy Imhoff on Facebook. And yeah, I hope to see you around Twitter and contributing to excellent Discovery conversation.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Where can we find you?
Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter, and I'm also an admin of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook.
Oh, and I have a book out. I forgot to pimp it.
Tell us.
The Star Trek. It's Outside In Makes It So. It's a group of there's over 100 of us who everybody got an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and we analyzed it from a different point of view. It was released in September, and there are so many awesome Star Trek authors that are part of it. My episode that I did was Schisms, and I really enjoyed writing about it.
Oh, very cool. I need to get that one.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see my name in print for the first time.
Is it on Amazon or where can we buy it?
You can actually buy it directly from the website, which is ATB Publishing, and I think I'll give you a link. Maybe you can add it to the DiscoTrek page if you do that in the comments.
Sure, of course.
Absolutely. All right. So I am LLA Posper on Twitter. I'm on Facebook in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group. The show DiscoTrek is disco_trek on Twitter. And we are the Tricorder Transmissions Network at thetricordertransmissions.com. Tricorder Show on Twitter. And so we may talk to you before next January, or we may not. We're not quite sure. But we are certainly looking forward to seeing everyone at STLV and talking to everyone, connecting with our listeners, maybe sooner than later, but if not, certainly January 8th, since the episode is January 7th. So thanks everyone for being here, and live long and prosper.